I still remember the way the lawyer's office smelled that afternoon, a mixture of old leather, dust, and the faint scent of strong coffee. It was supposed to be a formal but simple reading of my late husband's will. I had imagined it would be painful, yes, but straightforward. He'd been my partner for over 40 years, the father of my children, the man whose every flaw I thought I had memorized. I believed I knew his heart as well as my own, but I was wrong. The moment the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading, the air in the room shifted into something cold, suffocating, and almost unbearable. We were all there, gathered in that narrow office with its heavy curtains and polished oak table. My son sat beside me, quiet and respectful, though I could see the shadow of grief still clinging to his face. My daughter, nervously clutching a tissue, kept glancing at me as if to make sure I wouldn't crumble. I held myself as firmly as I could, my back straight, my hands folded on my lap. I thought the worst part was over. After all, I had already buried my husband. What more could hurt me now? That question was answered in the most cruel way possible. The lawyer read slowly, his voice steady, almost indifferent. He listed a few small bequests, charitable donations, a scholarship fund my husband had mentioned once or twice. Then came the line that shattered me. The remainder of my estate, including all properties, investments, and personal assets, I bequeath to my daughter, Emily Carter. The name echoed through the room like a gunshot. Emily Carter. I turned to my son in confusion, searching his eyes for clarity, but he looked as stunned as I was. My daughter gasped audibly and whispered, "Who is that?" The lawyer continued as if nothing unusual had happened, as though that name belonged naturally among us. But it didn't. That name was a stranger. A ghost. I felt my chest tighten as if invisible hands were pressing down on me. I interrupted the lawyer, my voice trembling but loud enough to silence the room. "Excuse me, who? My husband and I had 2 children, and their names are sitting right here. There is no Emily Carter." The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable, and adjusted his glasses. "According to Mr. Carter's instructions, Emily is to be recognized as his daughter and sole heir." He looked at me with something almost like pity, but no explanation followed. Just those cold words recorded in legal ink, carrying the authority of a man I had loved and trusted all my life. My children stared at me, their eyes wide, silently asking if I had hidden some enormous secret from them. I shook my head, my lips trembling. "I don't know who she is," I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt my credibility crumbling. I could sense the judgment in the air, the suspicion, the doubt. A daughter we never met? A woman who had never once appeared in our lives, never once been introduced at a family dinner, never once been mentioned in my presence. And yet she now owned everything we had built together. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but grief pinned me to the chair. My husband's absence became heavier than ever, like a cruel joke he was playing from beyond the grave. Had he lived a double life? Had he hidden an entire child from me while I raised his family, cooked his meals, and shared his bed? The humiliation scorched me from the inside out. What would people say when they learned that I was a fool, a blind wife, deceived for decades? Or worse, that I had known and chosen to ignore it? The lawyer closed the folder and looked around the room with a rehearsed smile that only deepened my despair. "Do you have any questions before we proceed with the formalities?" My daughter burst into tears. Covering her face with her hands, my son pressed his lips into a thin line, clearly trying to hold himself together. I sat there frozen, my mind spinning with memories of my husband. Every late night at the office, every unexplained trip, every moment he had brushed off my questions with a tired smile. Had those been signs I missed? Was I too trusting, too willing to believe in the picture-perfect marriage we presented to the world? The silence was broken by the sound of the door opening. A young woman stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. She was in her 20s, maybe early 30s, with dark hair cascading down her shoulders and a confident smile playing on her lips. She didn't look timid or nervous. She looked like someone who belonged there. "I'm Emily," she said softly, but there was steel in her voice. "I'm his daughter." My world tilted. The lawyer nodded as if her presence were expected, rehearsed even. My children turned to me, demanding answers with their eyes, but I had none to give. My stomach churned, and for the first time in my life, I doubted whether I had ever truly known the man I married. Emily sat across from me and placed a folder on the table. She slid out photographs, documents, and letters that all seemed to confirm her story. There she was, standing beside my husband at what looked like a birthday party. There she was again, smiling with him at a cafe. I stared at those pictures in disbelief, my mind screaming that they had to be doctored, manipulated somehow. But the resemblance was undeniable. She had his jawline, his eyes, even the same way of pressing her lips together when she tried not to smile too wide. My heart pounded with confusion and rage. How could he have hidden this from me? How could he have humiliated me like this? I wanted to deny it, to scream that it was all a lie. But the weight of the evidence crushed my protests before they could leave my lips. My son leaned closer to me, whispering, "Mom, did you know about her?" His tone carried accusation, as if I had betrayed him too. That cut deeper than the will, deeper than the photographs. My own children doubting me, suspecting me of being complicit in their father's betrayal. I shook my head frantically. "No, I swear I never knew." But my voice cracked, and I could see the seed of mistrust already planted. The room closed in on me. I felt like a prisoner on trial, condemned without defense. The lawyer shuffled papers. Emily smiled with quiet satisfaction. And my children sat in painful silence. I wanted to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of disgrace. But I also wanted answers. I needed to know why my husband had done this, why he had left me with nothing but shame and confusion, why he had decided that the life we built together wasn't enough. Was it me? Had I failed him somehow? Or was he simply a man I had never truly known? That question has haunted me every day since. And now I ask you, if you were in my place, sitting in that office while your husband's secrets came crashing down on you, what would you do? Would you accept the humiliation quietly? Or would you fight to uncover the truth, no matter how dark it might be? I didn't know my answer then, but I know it now. And the path I chose changed everything. That night after the will reading, I could not sleep. I lay awake in the dark, my husband's side of the bed still untouched, still carrying the faint trace of his cologne, and yet all I could feel was betrayal pressing down on me. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside seemed to mock me. 40 years of marriage, 40 years of loyalty, and in 1 hour it had been shattered by a single name, Emily Carter. I kept turning those syllables over in my head as if by repeating them I could make them make sense. But they never did. They just felt like acid on my tongue. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair with mechanical movements. My reflection looked pale, older, smaller. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My daughter knocked on the door softly and entered with red eyes and trembling lips. She didn't need to say anything. Her gaze carried the unspoken question, "How much did you know?" I insisted again that I had never heard of Emily before yesterday, but I could tell my words didn't soothe her. Seeds of doubt are poisonous. Once they are planted, they grow silently, twisting everything in their path. I tried to convince myself there had to be a mistake, a clerical error, some cruel joke. But then, 2 days later, Emily herself appeared at our doorstep. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who already knew she owned the house she was walking into. My son opened the door, and the way she smiled at him, calm, assured, like a half-sibling come to claim her place, sent a chill through me. I stood frozen in the hallway as she introduced herself again, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "I'm your father's daughter, too. He wanted me here." I wanted to scream that she was lying, but before I could, she pulled out documents from her bag. Birth certificate, photographs, letters allegedly written by my husband. She laid them on the kitchen table as if presenting evidence in court. My son examined them with cautious eyes while my daughter hovered at my shoulder, her face unreadable. I picked up one of the letters, the handwriting so similar to my husband's that it made my hands tremble. It said, "To my dear Emily, I am sorry I cannot be with you openly, but know that you are always in my heart." My stomach lurched. It looked real, too real. But I knew my husband's way of writing. I knew the way his letters curved. Something about the stroke of the pen felt imitated. Emily watched me, her lips curled in a polite but knowing smile. She seemed to enjoy my discomfort as though this were a performance and I was the unwilling audience. She said, "I don't want to cause trouble. I just want what my father promised me." Trouble? She had detonated a bomb in the middle of our family and was now pretending to be gracious. After she left, silence wrapped the house. My daughter finally broke it with a whisper. "Mom, what if she's telling the truth?" My heart splintered. The betrayal was not only from my husband now, but from the cracks forming in my children's faith in me. I told her firmly, "She is not his daughter. I lived with your father. If she had existed, I would have known." But my voice wavered at the end, betraying the very doubt I was trying to banish. The following week was filled with small torments. Neighbors, curious and eager for gossip, began stopping by with sympathetic smiles that felt like knives. "Such a shock," Mrs. Thompson whispered one morning as she handed me a pie I did not want. "But sometimes men lead double lives. We never really know them, do we?" Her words dripped with pity, not compassion. She left before I could respond, but the poison lingered. Even in church, where I had always felt safe, I caught whispers behind me. "That's the widow with the secret daughter." I bowed my head, pretending not to hear, but every syllable stabbed deeper. The humiliation was spreading like wildfire. And yet, beneath the shame, another feeling was growing. Anger. Anger at Emily, at the lawyer who had read that cursed will, at my husband for putting me in this nightmare, and even at myself for doubting my own instincts. One evening, while cleaning my husband's old study, I stumbled upon a box tucked behind his desk. My hands shook as I opened it, praying for answers. Inside were old bank statements, some addressed to a P.O. box I had never known about. The balances were large, the transfers regular. To whom had he been sending money all these years? My chest tightened. Could it have been Emily? Was she truly his blood after all? Or was this the proof that someone had been siphoning our lives away under the guise of a false identity? I confronted my son that night, desperate for his support. I showed him the bank statements, expecting outrage, expecting him to join me in my disbelief. But instead, his eyes darkened. "Maybe Dad really did have another child," he said slowly. "Maybe he wanted to protect her." His words sliced me open. Protect her? What about us? What about the family he built openly? The children I bore, the loyalty I gave? My son's doubt was more painful than any stranger's gossip. It was the confirmation that Emily's poison was seeping into my own home. And yet, despite the despair, something inside me hardened. A voice I had long buried began to rise. No, I thought, I will not be erased from my own life. I will not allow some stranger to walk into my house, wave forged papers, and claim the legacy I bled for alongside my husband. I will uncover the truth, no matter how painful it may be. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight and the house fell silent, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread before me, the photographs, the letters, the certificates. They all looked so perfect, so carefully prepared, too perfect. And that perfection was exactly what betrayed them. Real life is messy. Real records carry mistakes, smudges, inconsistencies. These papers looked as though they had been created by someone meticulous, someone desperate to make them convincing. For the first time since the will was read, I felt a spark of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was not my husband's betrayal, but someone else's deception. I looked at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "If you loved me, if you ever truly loved me, give me the strength to find the truth." The words tasted like prayer and challenge at once, and as I sat there, the first outlines of a battle plan began to form in my mind. The following days felt like walking through a fog where every shadow whispered betrayal. I kept going back to that hidden box of bank statements, those crisp envelopes addressed to a P.O. box I had never known existed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was just out of reach, taunting me, waiting for me to gather the courage to tear it wide open. But it wasn't just the papers that haunted me. It was the way Emily's face lingered in my mind, the smugness in her smile, the way she carried herself as though she had already won. It didn't take long for the whispers in the neighborhood to transform into stories. One morning, I was pruning the rose bushes by the gate when Mrs. Green, the woman from across the street, approached me with the kind of cautious expression people wear when they pretend to be concerned but are really hungry for gossip. She asked softly, "Did you know your husband used to be seen downtown, always with the same young woman? I thought it was a colleague, but maybe it was her." Her pause was deliberate, her eyes gleaming with pity she wanted me to notice. I tried to hold my face still, not to let the tremor in my hands betray me, but inside my stomach turned to ice. Another neighbor, Mr. Riley, mentioned he once saw my husband dining at an upscale restaurant with a girl who looked much younger, laughing as though they shared a private world. I wanted to shout that he must be mistaken, that my husband was faithful, but even as I opened my mouth, my memory betrayed me. How many nights had my husband returned late, his excuses vague? How many times had I chosen to believe him rather than dig deeper? The doubt gnawed at me until I could barely breathe. The final blow came when I visited an old friend of my husband's, someone who had worked with him decades ago. We met at a small cafe, the kind with chipped tables and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air. He looked at me with hesitation before finally saying, he mentioned once, years ago, that he had responsibilities no one knew about, a child maybe. He didn't go into detail, but he seemed burdened. My throat closed. Was that a confession I had ignored all these years? Had he been trying to tell me something I refused to hear? Or was this memory of my husband's friend twisted by time, shaped by the rumors that were now consuming our lives? When I returned home, my children were waiting in the living room, their faces tense. Emily had visited again, this time with even more paperwork, school records, photographs of her supposed childhood, even a lock of hair she claimed my husband had kept. My son told me she had shared stories about their father, details so specific they seemed undeniable. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but cold, "what if she really is our sister? Dad might have hidden it because he was ashamed. Maybe he wanted to make it right in the end." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. My own son, my flesh and blood, was beginning to side with the intruder. My daughter, sitting silently with her hands clenched in her lap, wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to tell them both to stop, to remind them of who raised them, who cooked their meals, who sat by their bedsides when they were sick, but the look on their faces told me they were already slipping away, drawn into Emily's carefully crafted story. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible, untrusted, unwanted. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the documents Emily had left behind. I traced the edges of the birth certificate with my fingertip, noticing again how pristine it looked, as though it had been printed yesterday. No wrinkles, no fading, no smudges. Too perfect. My instinct screamed at me that this was a fabrication. But how could I prove it when even my children were falling under her spell? The next morning, I walked to the grocery store, hoping the routine would steady me. As I stood in line, I heard whispers behind me. Two women were talking in hushed tones, not realizing or not caring that I could hear them. "That's her," one said, "the widow whose husband had another daughter. Can you imagine the shame?" The other replied, "I guess the perfect marriage wasn't so perfect after all." My face burned. I paid quickly and rushed out, but their words clung to me like burrs. The humiliation was no longer confined to my family. It had become a spectacle for the entire community. It was in that fragile state that the second shock arrived. Emily herself confronted me on the front porch later that week, her tone almost sympathetic, but her eyes sharp as blades. "I know this is hard for you," she said, "but it's better if you accept it. Fighting me will only make it worse. Your husband wanted me to have everything, and that's what will happen. I don't want to push you out, but if you make this ugly, I will have no choice." The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil, but what cut deepest was the casual cruelty. She was threatening me in my own home, the house I had built with my husband, the house where I had raised my children. When she left, I collapsed into a chair, my body trembling with rage and despair. For the first time, I truly felt alone. My children doubted me, my neighbors judged me, and Emily stood tall with her arsenal of forged proof. I thought of my husband's photograph on the mantel, his smile frozen in time, and I whispered through gritted teeth, "If you betrayed me, then may God forgive you, because I never will. And if this is a lie, then I will burn it to the ground." It was then that I remembered the bank statements again. I studied them under the lamp late into the night, tracing the numbers, comparing dates. Something strange caught my eye. One of the statements had a seal that seemed slightly off, the ink a different shade than the others. Another had a date that didn't align with the supposed timeline of Emily's childhood. My pulse quickened. Maybe I wasn't imagining things. Maybe the perfection of her story was its weakness. But before I could piece it together, my son confronted me again. He said he had spoken to Emily privately, that she told him she only wanted what was rightfully hers, and that she was willing to share part of the inheritance if we cooperated. His voice carried a note of persuasion, almost as though he believed her kindness. I wanted to shake him, to scream that he was blind, that she was playing him like a fiddle. Instead, I bit my tongue because I knew anger would only push him further away. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I wandered into the yard. The cool air wrapped around me as I looked at the stars, feeling more isolated than I had in my entire life. My heart ached with betrayal, not only from the possibility that my husband had deceived me, but from the undeniable truth that my own children were slipping through my fingers. Emily was not just taking my husband's legacy, she was taking my family. I clenched my fists and swore to myself that I would not allow it. Somewhere in the cracks of her perfect story, the truth was hiding. I only had to be strong enough, clever enough, and relentless enough to find it. And when I did, the whole facade she had built would collapse, and she would know exactly what it meant to try to steal a widow's dignity. The storm inside my home only grew darker after Emily's last visit. I could feel her presence in every corner of the house, like a shadow that lingered even when she wasn't there. The worst part was not the papers she carried or the photographs she flaunted, but the way my children's eyes began to shift when they looked at me. There was doubt in their gaze now, sharp and heavy, as though I had become a stranger in my own family. One evening, I walked past my son's room and heard him speaking in hushed tones. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. He was on the phone. His voice was low but urgent, and the name he whispered made my stomach sink. He was talking to Emily. "I just want to understand," he said. "If you're really my sister, then I have a right to know." I stood there, my heart pounding, listening as she fed him more of her carefully rehearsed lies. She spoke of birthdays never celebrated, of letters never answered, of a father who promised to make things right one day. She painted herself as the victim, and I could hear my son's resolve softening with every word. When he finally hung up, I walked into the room, my hands trembling. "Why are you talking to her?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked at me with frustration, almost anger. "Because I need to know the truth, Mom. What if she is my sister? What if Dad wronged her, and now we're punishing her for his mistake?" His words sliced through me. I wanted to tell him that the truth was already in front of him, that Emily was nothing but a fraud. But when your own child looks at you with eyes that no longer trust, every defense feels like sand slipping through your fingers. The days that followed became unbearable. My daughter, though quieter, began avoiding me, spending more time outside the house, answering my questions with short replies. At family dinners, the silence was suffocating. We no longer laughed, no longer shared stories. Every meal felt like a trial where I was the defendant, and they were silently deliberating my guilt. Emily's shadow was at the table with us, unseen but powerful. I tried to cling to my sanity by revisiting old memories of my husband. I sat with our photo albums, flipping through pictures of vacations, birthdays, anniversaries. At first, they comforted me, reminding me of the life we built. But soon, even those memories turned into daggers. In every picture, I began to wonder, was this smile hiding a secret? Was this trip an excuse to visit her? Was I nothing more than a convenient mask for his double life? I hated myself for even asking, for letting Emily's poison seep into my mind. But doubt is a cruel parasite. Once it enters, it devours everything. The gossip outside my home only intensified the torment. At the market, 2 women I had known for years fell silent the moment I walked in, their eyes darting away as though I carried a contagious shame. At church, the pastor gave a sermon about hidden sins, and though he never said my name, I could feel every word directed at me. People began treating me not as the faithful wife of a respected man, but as the pitiful widow who had been deceived. I walked home each Sunday with my head bowed, my heart heavy with humiliation. The breaking point came one afternoon when Emily arrived unannounced with a folder full of new documents. She sat in my living room, comfortable as though it already belonged to her, and laid them out one by one. Photographs of her as a child with a man whose face was conveniently turned away. Letters signed with my husband's name, a journal filled with entries about his secret daughter. My son sat across from her, nodding slowly, as if the evidence were irrefutable. I wanted to scream that it was all fabricated, but the weight of their silence crushed me. Finally, I snapped. I stood up, my voice shaking with fury. "These are lies, every single one of them. My husband would never do this to me, to us." Emily tilted her head with mock pity and said, "Sometimes men have lives their wives never know about. Maybe it's time you stop pretending." My son lowered his gaze, refusing to meet my eyes. My knees went weak, and I sank back into the chair, tears burning my cheeks. For the first time, I felt truly defeated. That night, I couldn't bear to stay in my bedroom. I sat on the floor of my husband's study, clutching the bank statements I had found, trying to draw strength from their inconsistencies, but even those scraps of suspicion felt fragile compared to Emily's arsenal of documents. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood of his desk and whispered, "Why are you letting them do this to me? Why didn't you protect us?" The silence answered back, heavy and merciless. As the weeks dragged on, the isolation deepened. Invitations from friends stopped coming. Neighbors avoided my gaze. My daughter moved in with a friend for a while, claiming she needed space. My son spent more and more time with Emily, asking her questions, trying to piece together a history that never existed. I was left alone in the house, pacing the rooms like a ghost, haunted by the laughter that once filled the walls. At one point, I considered giving up. The thought crept in, late at night, when the loneliness became unbearable. What if I just walked away? Let her take the money, the house, everything. Maybe then the whispers would stop. Maybe then my children would find peace. But every time that thought came, another voice rose inside me, fierce and unyielding. No, this is my life. My husband's legacy belongs to the family we built together, not to a stranger with forged papers and a rehearsed story. If I surrendered, I would not only lose the inheritance, I would lose my dignity, my children, my very identity. One evening, my grandson, innocent, too young to understand the storm tearing us apart, looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, who is that lady everyone talks about? Is she really part of our family?" His wide eyes, filled with confusion, nearly broke me. I hugged him tightly and whispered, "No matter what anyone says, you belong to me, and nothing will ever change that." But inside, my heart shattered. The poison had reached even the youngest, the ones who should have been protected from this nightmare. The lowest point came when I discovered that Emily had filed a petition with the court, requesting that the estate be transferred to her name as quickly as possible. The lawyer delivered the news with clinical detachment, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. "Unless you can prove otherwise," he said, "the court will likely recognize her claim." My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. I walked home in a daze. The world around me a blur of colors and sounds. The walls of my house felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with betrayal. That night, I sat in the dark with the curtains drawn, unable to move, unable to think. The image of Emily's smug smile, my children's doubtful eyes, the whispers of the community, all of it swirled together until I felt I was drowning. I whispered into the silence, "Maybe I'm the fool they think I am. Maybe I've lost everything." Tears streamed down my face until I could cry no more. My body shook with exhaustion, and for the first time I felt truly close to giving up. But just as despair threatened to consume me entirely, a flicker of clarity pierced through. I remembered the odd detail in the documents, the seal that didn't match, the dates that didn't align. In my darkest hour, I clung to that fragile inconsistency like a lifeline. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was still within reach. I wiped my tears and whispered, "Not yet. I will not let her win. Not yet." The letter from the court arrived on a gray morning, the kind of day when even the sky seems reluctant to rise. I remember standing at the mailbox, the paper trembling in my hands before I even knew what it said. My heart already knew. When I opened it, the words blurred through the tears in my eyes. Hearing scheduled regarding the petition of Emily Carter as sole heir. My knees nearly gave out on the sidewalk. It was official now. The lie had grown roots deep enough to reach the walls of justice. I walked back into the house like a ghost, clutching the letter as if it were a death sentence. My son was in the living room, his phone in hand. When I showed him the paper, he didn't even look surprised. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe it's better if we stop fighting this. Maybe Dad wanted to make things right. Emily isn't asking to destroy us. She just wants what belongs to her." His words seared me. What belongs to her? The house I built with my husband's sweat, the family memories etched into these walls, the life I sacrificed for decades? To hear my own son speak those words was worse than the gossip of strangers. I wanted to argue, to scream, but my voice cracked under the weight of despair. "And what about us?" I whispered. "What about the family he raised in daylight, not in shadows? Do we mean so little?" My son avoided my eyes, and in that moment I realized how far I had fallen in his trust. Emily's poison had worked. She didn't just want the estate. She wanted me stripped of everything, even the love of my children. My daughter returned that evening from her friend's place, her face pale, her words careful. She told me she had met Emily at a cafe, that Emily had shared stories about how lonely her childhood had been without a father, how she had waited years for recognition. She seemed so sincere, my daughter said softly. What if we're the ones punishing her for something she couldn't control? I felt my heart shatter again. Both of my children were slipping away, convinced by a woman who had only appeared weeks ago with a folder of forged documents. I was being erased, not just from the will, but from the hearts of my own blood. At night, the house turned against me. The ticking of the clock mocked me, the empty side of the bed accused me, and every photograph on the walls seemed to whisper betrayal. I replayed every moment of my marriage in my mind, every late-night meeting, every unexplained trip, every time he turned away when I asked too many questions. The doubt gnawed at me until even I began to wonder if I had been blind for decades. Maybe Emily was real. Maybe he had loved her too. The thought was unbearable, but it clung to me like a shroud. The whispers outside grew louder. I overheard two men at the bakery say, "That's her, the widow who didn't know her husband had another child. Imagine living a lie like that." I clenched the paper bag in my hands until it nearly tore. When I stepped outside, I caught them staring, their eyes filled with pity and curiosity. I wanted to disappear. The humiliation reached its peak at church. After the service, the pastor gently placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "We all carry sins we cannot see, sister. Sometimes we suffer for the choices of those we love." I knew he meant to comfort me, but it felt like a verdict. Even the church had branded me with shame. As the court date approached, the pressure became unbearable. Emily sent letters through her lawyer, urging me to settle privately. The words dripped with false kindness. "We don't have to make this ugly. Accept what your husband wanted, and I will let you keep a portion." My hands trembled with rage as I read them. She wasn't offering generosity. She was twisting the knife, making me beg for scraps from my own table. I began to crumble under the weight. One night, I collapsed on the kitchen floor, clutching the cold tiles as sobs racked my body. I whispered to the empty room, "I can't do this anymore. I can't fight her. I can't even protect my children from her lies." For a moment, I truly believed it was over, that I had lost, that my husband's memory, my dignity, my family, all of it was gone. But then, as I lay there in the dark, my hand brushed against the folder of documents I had kept hidden. I pulled it close, desperate for something to hold on to. My eyes fell on one of the birth certificates Emily had presented. I had seen it dozens of times, but grief had always blurred my vision. This time, in the raw silence of despair, I noticed something small. The seal at the bottom bore a design that hadn't been used until years after the date on the certificate. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? I searched through the other papers, my hands trembling. Another inconsistency. A letter dated 1995 written on stationery that hadn't existed until 2001. A photograph with a background detail that felt out of place, as if pasted from another time. My breath quickened. It wasn't just instinct anymore, it was evidence. Tiny cracks in the perfect mask she wore. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of strength course through me. The despair that had nearly drowned me gave way to something sharper. Resolve. If these documents were forged, then Emily's entire story would collapse like a house of cards. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't blind. I was right. Still, fear gnawed at me. Could I prove it before the court? Would anyone believe me when even my children had turned against me? I pressed my forehead against the desk and whispered, "God, give me one ally. Just one person who will stand with me." The next day, my prayer was answered in an unexpected way. While walking past the town clerk's office, I saw an old acquaintance, Mr. Daniels, a retired official who had worked in records for decades. I hesitated before approaching him, my voice trembling as I asked, "Would you take a look at something for me?" I handed him a copy of Emily's birth certificate. He studied it with practiced eyes, his brow furrowing. "This seal doesn't match the year," he said finally. "It's subtle, but anyone who knows the system would catch it." My knees nearly gave out from relief. It was real. The lie had slipped, and now I had proof. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The battle was far from over, but I had found the first crack in her armor. Emily had nearly destroyed me, nearly stripped me of everything I loved, but now I had a weapon, a reason to rise again. For weeks, I had felt like a shipwrecked soul clinging to debris in a storm. But the moment Mr. Daniels confirmed that the seal on Emily's birth certificate didn't match the year, it was as if lightning struck through the fog. I was not crazy. I was not the blind widow everyone whispered about. I had been right all along. Something was rotten in her story. That tiny inconsistency, almost invisible to the naked eye, became the thread I knew could unravel the entire tapestry of her lies. I walked home that evening with a new fire in my chest. The same streets that had mocked me with whispers and pity now looked different. Every step I took, I repeated the same thought. She forged it. She forged it. She thought she could fool me, but she left fingerprints on her crime. For the first time in months, I felt the ground beneath my feet again. That night, I gathered every document Emily had flaunted. I spread them out across the dining room table like pieces of a puzzle. The lamp cast sharp light on their edges, and I scrutinized them one by one. The stationery, the handwriting, the photographs. I examined fonts, ink colors, paper textures. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but my grief had transformed into determination. And as I studied, more cracks appeared. A letter, supposedly written in the late 90s, used phrasing my husband had never used, words he always avoided. A school record bore the wrong signature format for that district. A photograph had a background billboard advertising a company that didn't exist until years later. The more I looked, the clearer it became. Emily's story wasn't just suspicious, it was constructed, manufactured with precision but not perfection. She had underestimated me, thinking I was just a grieving widow too weak to notice the details. But she forgot one thing. I had lived with that man for decades. I knew his voice, his quirks, his handwriting better than anyone, and I knew when something didn't fit. Still, knowledge was not enough. I needed power. I needed someone who could stand beside me in court and transform my suspicions into undeniable evidence. My mind went to Mr. Daniels, but he was retired and frail. His word alone wouldn't be enough. Then I remembered a young woman my husband once mentored at his firm, Claire Johnson. She had become a lawyer herself, sharp and relentless. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but I found her number in an old address book and dialed with trembling fingers. When she answered, her voice was brisk, professional. But when she realized it was me, it softened. "Mrs. Carter, it's been so long. How are you holding up?" I nearly broke into tears at the sound of genuine concern. I explained everything in a rush: the will, Emily, the documents, the inconsistencies. She listened quietly, and when I finished, there was a pause. Then she said with steady conviction, "Bring everything to me. If what you say is true, we can fight this." The next morning, I packed the documents into a box, my hands shaking but my heart steady. At her office, Claire spread them out on her desk, examining them with a practiced eye. She pointed out flaws I hadn't even noticed: inconsistent signatures, formatting errors, seals from the wrong agencies. With each revelation, my heart pounded harder. Finally, she looked at me and said, "These are not authentic. Someone has gone to great lengths to forge them, but it's sloppy in ways that matter. Whoever is behind this didn't expect anyone to look this closely." My breath caught. "So you believe me?" Claire leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "I don't just believe you. I'm going to help you prove it." At that moment, something inside me shifted. For so long, I had been the victim, drowning in doubt and shame. But now I had an ally, someone willing to stand beside me. I was no longer alone. Walking out of her office, the air felt lighter, my steps firmer. For weeks, Emily had painted me as powerless, cornered, humiliated. But she had made a fatal mistake. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought I would crumble under the weight of whispers and betrayal. She was wrong. At dinner that night, I told my children calmly, "I have evidence that proves Emily's documents are forged." My son scoffed. My daughter looked skeptical, but I didn't waver. "You may doubt me now, but soon you will see. I will not let a stranger steal your father's legacy with lies." I spoke not as a broken widow, but as a mother reclaiming her ground. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. Perhaps they began to wonder if Emily's mask wasn't as flawless as she made it seem. Of course, Emily sensed the shift. 2 days later, she showed up again, this time colder, sharper, her smile gone. She accused me of dragging my children through unnecessary pain, warned me that fighting her would only make me look desperate. But her threats no longer pierced me the way they once did. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "If you want to play in the dark, fine. But the truth has a way of finding light, and when it does, you'll burn." Her expression faltered for just a second, and that was all I needed. The cracks in her confidence were showing. The tide was turning. I could feel it. For months, I had been drowning in humiliation and doubt, but now I was rising, step by step, out of the ashes. Emily thought she had written the ending of my story, but she forgot. I still held the pen. The court date was approaching fast, but instead of dread, I felt anticipation. I wasn't just defending an inheritance, I was fighting for my dignity, my children's trust, my husband's true memory, and I swore to myself I would walk into that courtroom not as a victim, but as a woman ready to expose every lie, no matter the cost. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sit still. Every tick of the clock echoed in my chest like a drum of war. Claire had told me we had enough to expose the lies in court, but I wanted more. I wanted to look Emily in the eye, to strip away that smug mask before she could stand in front of a judge and pretend to be my husband's daughter. So I called her. My voice was steady, almost too steady, when I asked her to meet me at a small cafe downtown. She hesitated, then agreed. Perhaps she thought I wanted to beg, to strike some desperate deal. Perhaps she couldn't resist the chance to see me squirm, but she came. The cafe was dimly lit, nearly empty, the kind of place where secrets could be whispered without fear of witnesses. I sat at a corner table, my hands folded, my heart pounding. When she walked in, she carried herself like a queen arriving at her coronation, shoulders back, chin high, eyes sharp. She slid into the chair across from me and crossed her legs with deliberate poise. "What is it this time?" she asked coolly. "Another plea for mercy?" I met her gaze without flinching. "No, this time I'm the one with questions." She smirked, leaning back. "Ask whatever you like. The truth doesn't scare me." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the birth certificate, the one with the mismatched seal. I laid it on the table between us. "Do you see this?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment before she regained her composure. "Of course, that's proof of who I am." I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was almost a whisper. "Funny, because this seal wasn't used until years after you were supposedly born. Care to explain that?" For the first time, her smile faltered. She shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "That's ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said, my voice sharper now, "and I'm not the only one. Experts have seen this. They've confirmed it's a forgery. Every document you brought, every letter, every picture, it's all fake. Sloppy work dressed up as truth." Her jaw tightened. "You think anyone will believe you over me? Over the will?" I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. They will, because lies crumble when pressed. And tomorrow, I'll press until every crack shows. But before that, I wanted to look you in the eye and hear you admit it. Why, Emily? Why go to such lengths to destroy a family that isn't yours? Her eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe fear. Then, for the first time, she dropped the mask. Her voice was low, venomous. Because you people have everything. The house, the money, the respect. And what do I have? Nothing. I was promised a chance and I took it. Promised? I echoed, my breath catching. By who? She froze. Too late, she realized what she had said. She tried to recover, shaking her head. No one. You wouldn't understand. But I leaned in, my eyes locked on hers. It wasn't you, was it? You're just the actress. Someone else is pulling the strings. Her silence was louder than any confession. She looked away, her lips pressed tight, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. That was all the confirmation I needed. I sat back, my voice steady but filled with fire. Tomorrow, when the judge asks, I'll show them everything. The forged papers, the mistakes, the truth you can't hide. And when that happens, you'll wish you never stepped foot into my house. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes were blazing, but beneath the fury, I saw fear. You don't know what you're doing, she hissed. You'll regret this. I stood too, squaring my shoulders, refusing to back down. No, I said firmly. The only one who will regret this is you. For a long moment we stood there, two women locked in battle, the air between us crackling with tension. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving the cafe door swinging in her wake. I sat back down, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from exhilaration. For months she had held the power, twisting my children, my neighbors, my very sanity. But now the tables had turned. I had seen her falter. I had heard her slip. I knew she wasn't the mastermind, just a pawn in someone else's scheme. And tomorrow, in court, the whole world would see it too. As I left the cafe, the night air felt different, lighter, charged with purpose. The despair that once weighed me down had transformed into resolve. Tomorrow was not just about inheritance anymore. It was about truth. It was about dignity. It was about reclaiming everything Emily and her shadowy accomplice had tried to steal. And for the first time, I was ready. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a strange mixture of formality and fatigue. As I stepped inside, the murmur of voices fell on me like a wave. Neighbors, distant relatives, curious strangers who had all come to witness the scandal. I held my head high, though my stomach churned. Today was the day the truth would either save me or bury me. Emily was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table in a sleek navy suit, her hair perfectly arranged, her face set in a mask of calm confidence. But I saw it, the faint twitch in her jaw, the quick dart of her eyes when she spotted me. The memory of our confrontation at the cafe was still fresh between us. She knew I had found the cracks in her story, and I intended to make them visible to everyone. My children sat behind me. My son's face was tense, his loyalty torn. My daughter's eyes flickered between doubt and hope. I wanted to reach back, to squeeze their hands, but I resisted. They would have to see the truth with their own eyes, not through my pleas. The judge entered, his gavel striking the wood. This court is now in session. The air grew heavier, as though the entire building was holding its breath. Emily's lawyer spoke first, presenting her case with smooth words and carefully chosen evidence. He displayed the will, read my husband's supposed intentions, laid out the photographs and letters as if they were holy scripture. The audience murmured with each piece, nodding, whispering. To them, it looked airtight. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my knees trembling but my voice steady. Claire walked beside me, her presence like a shield. "Your Honor," she began, "we do not dispute that a will exists. We dispute its authenticity, and more importantly, the authenticity of the evidence supporting Miss Carter's claim." She laid out the birth certificate first. "Notice the seal, Your Honor. This design was not used until 1992, yet the certificate is dated 1985. A simple mistake, perhaps. No, a forgery." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I watched Emily's face carefully. Her mask cracked just slightly, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she composed herself again. Next came the school records. Claire pointed to the signature at the bottom. At the time this record was allegedly signed, the superintendent of that district was a different individual. This signature belongs to someone who did not assume office until 3 years later. Another murmur from the audience, louder this time. Finally, she turned to the letters. "We have handwriting experts who will testify that these are imitations. The strokes lack the natural fluidity of the deceased, and more tellingly, several letters mention events and places that did not exist at the time they were supposedly written. Whoever forged them underestimated the importance of detail." The judge leaned forward, studying the papers with narrowed eyes. Emily's lawyer objected, tried to dismiss the findings as speculation, but the tide was shifting. The audience sensed it too. I could hear the whispers, forgeries, lies. Maybe the widow was right all along. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Claire called Mr. Daniels to the stand. His voice was frail, but his authority was unshakable. He explained in detail how official seals changed over the years, how records were maintained, and why Emily's documents were riddled with impossibilities. His testimony was precise, undeniable. Emily's composure began to crumble. She shifted in her seat, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. I watched her hands tremble as she gripped the edge of the table. For months she had held herself above me, smiling smugly as she dismantled my dignity. Now she was the one unraveling. Finally, Claire turned to me. "Mrs. Carter, would you please tell the court what you discovered in your personal search?" I rose, my voice thick with emotion but clear. I told them about the bank statements, the P.O. box, the inconsistencies I noticed late at night when despair had nearly consumed me. I described how Emily had slipped in our private meeting, how she had admitted someone else had promised her this chance. The judge's eyes sharpened. "Is this true, Miss Carter?" he demanded. Emily stammered, her lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The word promised hung in the air like a noose, and then came the final twist. Claire presented phone records, obtained legally, that showed frequent communication between Emily and a number belonging to none other than my nephew, my late husband's own sister's son. He was the mastermind, the puppeteer who had coached Emily, provided her with forged documents, and convinced her she could steal everything. The courtroom erupted in shocked gasps. My nephew's face, pale and sweating, was visible in the gallery. He tried to slip out, but officers moved quickly to detain him for questioning. Emily broke. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "He told me it would work. He said the old woman wouldn't fight back." Her words echoed through the chamber, sealing her fate. The judge's gavel struck hard. "Order in the court." Silence fell once more. He turned to Emily, his voice stern. "This case is dismissed. The evidence is fraudulent, the claim invalid. The estate remains with the rightful family. Ms. Carter, you will face charges for perjury and fraud. And as for Mr. Thompson, he will answer for his role in this conspiracy." The room buzzed with outrage and astonishment. I stood there, my chest heaving, tears blurring my vision. My children rushed to me, their faces pale with guilt and relief. "Mom, we're so sorry," my son whispered, clutching my hand. My daughter sobbed into my shoulder, her apologies spilling out in broken phrases. For the first time in months, I felt their faith returning, their love anchoring me once more. Emily was led away in handcuffs, her once confident posture now bent and broken. My nephew glared at me as he was taken, but I did not flinch. I had stared into the abyss of despair and survived. I had faced humiliation, betrayal, isolation, and I had risen. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds. Warm and bright on my face, reporters shouted questions, neighbors whispered apologies, strangers stared with awe. But I didn't need their words. I knew the truth now. My husband's legacy was safe, my dignity restored, and my enemies exposed. I looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "You see, my love? They tried to erase me, but I fought back, and I won." When the gavel struck for the final time and the judge declared Emily's claim fraudulent, it wasn't just a legal victory. It was as if the heavy curtains that had shrouded my life were ripped open in front of everyone. For months, I had carried the humiliation in silence, drowning under whispers and pity. Now the truth blazed in the open, and I wasn't the only one who felt its heat. Neighbors who had avoided me for weeks suddenly crowded around in the courthouse hallway. Mrs. Green, who had once spread the rumor that my husband had been seen with another woman, approached with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Stella," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have trusted you. I let the gossip blind me." For a moment, I almost turned away, but then I realized her apology wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had believed the lie. Reporters pushed microphones into my face, their questions sharp and urgent. "How does it feel to clear your name? What do you want to say to the community that doubted you?" I steadied my voice, holding my head high. "I want them to remember this. Appearances can deceive, lies can spread like wildfire, but the truth has its own power, and when it comes, it burns brighter than all the whispers." Claire, standing beside me, added firmly, "This case is a reminder that no amount of forged paper can erase reality. Justice may stumble, but it does not fall." Her words carried, echoing through the crowd until the clamor softened. But what struck me most wasn't the cameras or the apologies. It was the way ordinary people began to take sides, not in silence, but openly. Mr. Riley, the neighbor who had once told me he'd seen my husband with a younger woman, now admitted loudly, "I was wrong. I let my assumptions fill the gaps. She deserves our respect." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. The fire that had once fueled my humiliation now spread in reverse, consuming the lies and leaving only truth. The community that had turned its back on me was forced to confront its own cruelty, and they did so publicly. The very same women who had whispered in the bakery now defended me in front of strangers, saying, "She was framed, and she fought with dignity." The pastor who had once delivered that sermon about hidden sins came to my house the next day, his face flushed with shame. "Forgive me," he said quietly. "I should not have let rumor guide my words." I accepted his apology, not because I had forgotten, but because I had survived. Even my children, who had wavered and doubted, joined the chorus. At dinner, my son looked across the table with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I should have believed you from the start. I let her lies blind me. I'm so sorry." My daughter reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You never stopped fighting for us, even when we stopped fighting for you." Their words were a balm, a healing fire that burned away the residue of betrayal. Word of the case spread beyond our neighborhood. Friends from other towns called, their voices full of awe. "We read about it in the paper," one said. "You showed them all what courage looks like." Even strangers sent letters to my mailbox, thanking me for standing up, for not letting lies go unchallenged. One woman wrote, "Your fight gave me strength to confront my own family's betrayal. Thank you." I realized then that my battle had become larger than myself. It was no longer just about protecting my husband's estate or restoring my dignity. It was about exposing the danger of silence, the power of resilience, and the importance of fighting for truth even when the world insists you're wrong. The witnesses were no longer just lawyers and clerks. They were neighbors, friends, strangers, the entire community that now bore witness to the truth. The fire had spread. But this time, it wasn't gossip or betrayal that fueled it. It was justice. The days after the trial felt strangely quiet, like the air after a thunderstorm. The storm had passed, yes, but the damage it left behind was undeniable. Emily was led from the courthouse in handcuffs, her once perfect composure shattered. The newspapers published her photograph on the front page, her name now synonymous with fraud and disgrace. People who once whispered her lies now whispered her downfall, shaking their heads at how easily they had been fooled. As for my nephew, the true mastermind, his arrest sent ripples through the family. He had always been the charming one, the golden boy everyone trusted. Now, his reputation was ruined, his career gone, his face plastered across headlines as the architect of betrayal. He faced charges not only for fraud, but also for conspiracy and forgery. Relatives who once praised him now avoided his name, ashamed of what he had done. His parents, my in-laws, couldn't even look me in the eye. They apologized through clenched teeth, but the truth was clear. His greed had stained them all. The legal system moved slowly, but justice was already working. Emily confessed fully, hoping for leniency, but her words only deepened the court's anger. She admitted she was never my husband's daughter. Only a desperate woman lured into the scheme with promises of wealth. My nephew had fed her the lies, provided the documents, promised her a share of the fortune if she played her part convincingly enough. Now both of them were bound for prison, their futures stripped away as surely as they had tried to strip away mine. But even as they faced punishment, I had to face my own scars. My children, though back at my side, carried guilt that weighed on their shoulders. My son avoided my eyes for days, ashamed of how close he had come to abandoning me. One evening he finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Mom, I don't know how to live with the fact that I doubted you." I took his hand and held it tightly. "You live by learning, my son. Doubt is poison, but forgiveness is medicine. We survived because the truth stood with us." He cried openly then, and for the first time I saw my little boy again, not the man torn by lies, but the son who still needed his mother. My daughter was quieter in her remorse. She helped me in the kitchen, washed dishes silently, lingered close as if afraid I might slip away. One night she whispered, "I never stopped loving you, even when I doubted. I hope you can forgive me." I pulled her into my arms, my tears soaking her hair. "I already have," I told her, and I meant it. The community, too, had to reckon with their part. Neighbors brought flowers, pies, apologies. The pastor visited again, this time with humility, admitting his words had added to my burden. I accepted their gestures not because I needed them, but because I wanted the story to end not in bitterness, but in understanding. Betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but bitterness would finish the job. I refused to give it that power. Still, the house felt different now. Every corner carried echoes of the battle we had fought. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in my husband's study and stare at his photograph. The anger had dulled, replaced by something softer, though not quite forgiveness. I still wondered why he hadn't told me about the nephew's greed, why he hadn't secured our family better. But perhaps that was the cruelty of life. We never know all the answers, only the battles we must fight when truth is tested. One afternoon, I walked into town and saw a group of women gathered outside the bakery. They fell silent when they saw me, but this time, it wasn't pity or judgment in their eyes. It was respect. One of them finally said, "You showed us all how to fight back. We'll never forget it." I nodded quietly, my heart swelling not with pride, but with relief. The humiliation was gone. In its place stood something stronger, dignity, reclaimed and unshakable. Emily and my nephew lost everything, reputation, freedom, and the respect of those who once trusted them. I lost something too, innocence. The blind faith I once carried is gone forever, but I gained something greater, the knowledge that even in the darkest hour, I could rise. Weeks passed after the trial, and slowly the house that had once felt like a battlefield began to breathe again. The silence no longer pressed down on me. It soothed me. The whispers outside had quieted, replaced by nods of respect whenever I walked through town. My children, once torn by doubt, now lingered close, their presence a reminder that family could bend but not break. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea in my hands. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses from the garden my husband had planted years ago. For the first time in months, I felt peace wash over me. The storm had raged, but I had endured, and in enduring, I had been reborn. I looked at the sky and whispered to my husband's memory, "They tried to erase me, but I am still here. They tried to strip away our family's dignity, but it stands stronger than ever." I imagined his voice, the one that used to comfort me in the darkest hours, saying, "The truth will set you free." And it had. The scars remained, yes. Betrayal leaves its marks. But scars are proof of survival, not weakness. Every time I see the documents that once threatened to destroy me, I no longer feel fear. I feel strength. They remind me that lies can be powerful, but they are never eternal. The community, too, had changed. At church, the same people who once turned their eyes away now greeted me with warmth. Neighbors who had doubted me now defended me when gossip sparked elsewhere. My story had become a lesson, whispered not in shame but in warning. Never underestimate the quiet strength of a woman who has been wronged. One night, as I tucked my grandson into bed, he asked with innocent curiosity, "Grandma, is the bad lady gone forever?" I kissed his forehead and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, she's gone, and no one will ever take us away from each other again." His smile was pure, untainted by the darkness we had endured. It was in that smile that I found my final healing. Now, when I walk through the house, I no longer feel the shadows of betrayal. I feel the echoes of resilience. The photographs on the wall, once sources of pain, are now reminders of love, of years built on real foundations that no lie could erase. And so, I tell you this, from my heart to yours, if you were in my place, if you sat in that courtroom with your dignity hanging by a thread, would you fight back? Would you risk everything to reclaim the truth, even when the whole world calls you a fool? Or would you surrender, letting the lie define your story? I chose to fight, and in fighting, I reclaim not only my husband's legacy, but also my own voice. If my story has reached you, if my words have stirred something inside you, then let me ask you for one thing. Leave me a sign. Write in the comments where you are listening from, or leave the number 7 to show that you too believe truth always prevails. Because every story told is another candle, lit in the darkness, guiding someone else toward courage. The storm is over. The dignity remains. And I, once silenced by shame, now speak with the strength of truth.